So work out how this works. Perhaps I'm not. It's always wonderful when you can't make it work. A nice bit of tension in the morning. Anyway, so I want to discuss a bit how we came to this particular project. And it really started when the Urban Regeneration Unit said, let's look at the whole city. Let's look at the whole of Taipei and see where it is actually going, both physically, economically, and culturally, and also to sort of assess where it stands perhaps in a sort of more global sense. And I think we all know that cities are very interesting, complicated things. Essentially, obviously, they're living organisms. I think we also know that cities are incredibly complex because of all of the things that are happening in them, and I won't discuss that at all. And I think we all know that cities are also quite fragile when I once work out how this works. Tell me how to work this. Am I doing the wrong thing? Right. I'll get into my rhythm in a minute, yes, I hope. But anyway, I think we know that cities are complicated, complex, and it's very fragile as well. And I don't want to really discuss all the dramatic transformations that everybody knows about, because you're obviously experiencing them day to day. But I just took this picture at your exhibition at the Fine Art Museum, and it says, "The Great Acceleration." And I think some of the things we're seeing are precisely speeding up, and we need to, in one way or another, respond to them. And equally, of course, Taipei itself. And this is a picture my friend gave me, Richard, which is just revealing in Melbourne the fragility, the way things can just fall apart at any moment, just like our conference had to be collapsed into one day rather than 2 days. So the issue that emerged very quickly was that there was the danger that Taipei might become a 4-tier city. Now, what does a 4-tier city mean? It means that if you're looking at what cities around the world are the cities that are really very much determining the shape politically, economically, and culturally, there are some of those. You know, perhaps New York is one, perhaps Shanghai will become one, and so on. And the question is, where does Taipei lie in that? And I think the issue here is really quite important, that it at least has some recognition that it certainly should be tried to be a 2nd-tier city rather than a 3rd or a 4th. So the origins of this project really stemmed from those sort of questions and those sort of issues. And one of the first things we started doing 2 years ago was to measure the mood of Taipei. What is the feeling like? What are people feeling, the different stakeholders, young people, old people, business people, social people, and so on. And we did a series of sort of surveys asking questions about what people felt and so on. And I'm going to summarize some of those. And the first way we summarized it was in this book called Talented Taipei. And what that found was a series of things that we all know about, and that there are many people here who are interesting and so on, who have lots of expertise and potential, but many of them were leaving. And the question really we were asking, how can one create a situation where people who leave Taipei also come back? And how also can we create a situation where people come to Taipei, and we know that this has also been very difficult for certain people to immigrate. So one of the central issues that immediately emerged was the talent question, the talent problem, which of course is a global problem, but each city has to address it in its own way. And looking at that, in particular, we began to focus on the younger groupings of people below 35. I mean, the definition of young, of course, is quite a difficult one, but it could be under 20, under 30, under 35, and so on. And what we did discover in assessing all of that was that there was immense sort of creativity or imagination, immense desire to do things and produce things of interest. And what we concluded after the first year, that it was really a central issue, or perhaps the central issue. And one of the key messages that we really were trying to say is everybody is concerned about this talent question, but nobody is taking it as their central issue. And because of that, that the agenda around talent and creativity, or the creative talents of Taipei, was occasionally slipping off the agenda. So that was the first key message that came out of that. The second key message that emerged is that although the administration is very administrative, it is perhaps a bit rigid and could perhaps loosen up. I'm being very mild here. But I think everybody knows that the procedures are often far too complex, it's not agile enough, it's not flexible enough, and so on. So these were perhaps the two key messages that came out. And we concluded that Taipei cannot move forward if it also addresses the issue of the public administration. Obviously we want the administration to be accountable, transparent and all of that, but what we felt was that it was simply perhaps not as modern as it could be, and unless that was considered strongly, the city cannot move forward. Now, in terms of the results, the sort of things people said is people were really satisfied with the basic services that exist in Taipei. But there was a sense of frustration, anxiety, lack of confidence emerging. There was a worry, particularly amongst the younger people, about a lack of, in a sense, story of where Taipei is going. And a feeling all the time that you couldn't really do anything because the city government and also the national government was more controlling than more enabling. And that shift, it's easy to use the words controlling and enabling, but that shift had not sufficiently taken place. So basic services, wonderful, fine, but the other issues I mentioned really leading to frustration. And I was very pleased to find this Taiwanese woman who was willing to express this frustration in an image. So that is one of the key things. The other thing that became very apparent was that departments are so rigid that it was very difficult to look at bigger agendas across issues. So for example, physical regeneration always links to social regeneration and economic regeneration, or even cultural regeneration. And these things are very difficult to do if the departments do not connect across each other. And here again, unfortunately, it became clear that there was less collaboration than there should be. And what that really meant is that, in a way, this rigidity that I'm discussing often meant that also the politicians perhaps were interfering too much in the operational work of the, not you of course, but interfering perhaps too much in detail into the operational work of the officials, who are all very well educated and good people. So these are sort of quite difficult issues, and I apologise that I have to report back on those. So the conclusions of this first year was really that people were worried, particularly the young, that leaders are not facing up to this crisis, that there was a need for a new model, a new way of working, perhaps a new paradigm, that the old machinery, the existing machinery, was not adept at dealing with the new upcoming problems, and that there was a communications problem across generations, which is obviously reflected in the Sunflower Movement. And when we did this, a piece of work on assessing the potential of Taipei, we looked at the whole area of communications and connectivity. And if it was 100, you would be brilliant. if you were 1, it would be dreadful. Now, what we discovered, on average, it was roughly okay, not very good. But senior people, senior business people, senior administrators felt things were very good. Younger people below 35 said they were very bad. Now this is so stark, yeah? This disconnect. So that was one disconnect that became very clear. The second disconnect was in the assessment of the political framework. How does it work? Again, the average score, not as good as it could be. Senior people said it was rather good. Younger people said it was rather bad. Now, I know these are just figures, but they're very dramatic figures showing this disconnect. The third area of disconnection is to do with how effective people felt the city was. And I think most people really agree that Taipei is very effective when it knows what it needs to do, it's professional, it does things well. But again, the senior people said it is very, very good, whereas the younger people were saying, well, perhaps not as good as you think. And I think this point I'm making about the big disconnect is really the issue that we're talking about